without, I mean, I've heard officers say things like, even when they're in the department, because officers will tell me this, right? And it's subtle, but it's telling. They will say, look, when you're in this community, but when you're over here, you really got to watch it. So that's planted in their head what do you call it? They're going through training. So when they go over there, they're already apprehensive, right? And that's a nice word. I could say they got their hand on their gun.
Speaking with a friend before I left this morning, and he said most of the issues that take place between people is misunderstanding.
That our officers are primed for this change. I think a lot of the things that we're hearing in this moment, these calls for change in this moment, Oakland has been doing for many years because we were mandated to do a lot of them, right? And so I think, from our officers, acceptance of wearing body-worn cameras, right? I think they, all of them came into policing under body-worn cameras, right? When we have these conversations at the top of the organization about progressive ideas, they've come in under progressive policies. And so as we evolve with continuing to come up with new ways of policing, I think it's our job as leaders to make sure that they understand why these changes are important and what the benefits are, right? I mean, as we seek to build trust, we're trying to make sure my executive team, we're making sure our officers understand that this makes us better, right? It makes community feel like they can trust us when we're out there doing our job. It makes people more willing to comply with us, right? When they trust you, when they have some confidence in you. And so I think, they have bought in. I mean, I think the challenge for us is when we do see good policing, when we see good police officers, how do we push communities that have had a history of bad policing to acknowledge when they are starting to receive good police services, right? When you are seeing police departments that are not impacting community in the ways in which they have for many years, when they're starting to actually try to invest in building a relationship, how do we get that openness from community to also accept that it's a different day? Because I think that's what sometimes causes people to step back, is when they don't believe that all the work that they're putting in, all of the time that they're trying to get better and improve is giving them the response that they would like to see from community. Like, you take one step forward, you expect somebody to hopefully take a step towards you. So that is a difficulty. How do we keep people motivated in this moment? How do we keep people wanting to even be police officers and do this job? It's a difficult job with a lot of scrutiny, where one mistake can change your life, right? One bad decision can change your family's lives and everybody, right? And so how do you, as leaders, begin to continue to motivate people to do this very difficult job? We have to train them and put them out there as best prepared as we can to make good decisions while they're out there. And so I think that's what this moment brings to me, is it's this balance of both recognizing we are asking a lot from police officers, but also acknowledging when they're doing it right.
Files accessed.
I'm John Russo, Oakland City Attorney, reporting to you on February 9, 2009. The city recently won an unconditional and complete victory in an 8-year legal battle with 2 former Oakland police officers, part of a squad of officers known as the Riders.
The Riders were a unit of 4 Oakland police officers accused of beating suspects, planting evidence, kidnapping, and other crimes allegedly committed as part of a campaign of violent misconduct on Oakland streets in the late 1990s. In 2000, when those accusations came to light, the 4 cops were fired, both for misconduct and for refusing to cooperate with an internal affairs investigation of the accusations that were made against them. 2 of the Riders, Clarence Mbanig and Jude Siapno, filed grievances challenging their terminations 8 years ago.
Their case regarding the terminations was delayed for several years because both Officer Mbanig and Officer Siapno, along with one of the other Riders, were placed on criminal trial on 2 separate occasions. In the end, none of those officers were convicted, and the jury hung on most of the charges in both trials. Finally, in November of last year, an arbitrator ruled that the City of Oakland was within its rights to fire Officers Mbanig and Siapno for insubordination, and in January, we signed a settlement that ends their grievances and their civil suits. Neither of these officers will receive any money from the city. This was a significant ruling, not just because it would have been a major financial hit to the city had it gone the other way, but much more important is the principle that was at stake here. Officers must be accountable to their commanders within the department, and ultimately, officers are accountable to us, the residents of Oakland. If officers are able to refuse to answer to police brass and to internal affairs investigations, it would be impossible to have oversight of police behavior in our department. This office and the City Council were determined to uphold the police chief's right to question officers about their actions. After all, police officers do work for us, and to uphold the principle that officers have a responsibility to cooperate with internal affairs when allegations are made against them. More than 100 people filed civil rights lawsuits against the City of Oakland, claiming that they suffered abuse at the hands of the Riders Unit.
Plaintiffs claimed the riders kidnapped them, beat them while they were handcuffed, and framed them with planted evidence. Some of those claims were actually very compelling. It became very clear that this was about more than just one rogue unit of cops. It was about the need to reform the culture and practices of the entire police department to have real accountability and professional, effective law enforcement in our city. There is no conflict between the two. Accountability in one area will generate greater accountability for crime-fighting practices that our people are crying out for.
There's no conflict between good, effective, responsive crime fighting and abiding by the rules of the American Constitution. People would try to have you believe that there's a choice between the one and the other, but a department that has standards of accountability and good command supervision is a department that can respond to our people in their need for better crime fighting. That's what Oakland needs. That's what this case was really about. The alleged leader of the Riders, Frank Vasquez, fled the country to avoid prosecution, and to this day he is still on the lam. More than half of the plaintiff's cases were based upon the actions of Officer Vasquez. Had we gone to trial, the city would have been forced to try these cases defending the actions of a fugitive who was not present in court. And the defense costs of defending those cases, those 119 plaintiffs, would have exceeded $5 million. And that assumes we would have received a defense verdict here in Northern California with very liberal Northern California juries 119 out of 119 times. Given those circumstances, and to limit the liability of our taxpayers, the city agreed to settle with the plaintiffs in 2003. The city paid $2.2 million of a $10.5 million settlement. The balance was paid by our former insurance companies.
Today, Oakland is turning the page on a bleak chapter in our city's history.
Earlier today at City Hall, City Attorney John Russo, flanked by all the top brass, announced just how much Stevenson and her fellow plaintiffs are set to get in this out-of-court settlement.
Now, as part of that settlement of the civil rights lawsuits, Oakland is being monitored by a federal judge and must substantially complete a series of reforms by next January 2010. Our office and the police department have worked very hard together to make those reforms happen. If we have the political will here at City Hall, there is no doubt that we can meet the deadline of implementing all of these reforms by January of 2010, and the city will no longer be under federal supervision for its police department. Thanks for watching. For more information about this case and for the other work that's being done here at the City Attorney's Office, please go to our website, oaklandcityattorney.org. Thank you very much.
We are still in the NSA. This is our
Oh, you're still in it. Okay.
This is our 18th year under the negotiated settlement agreement. It has been, challenging for us to reach full compliance with the settlement agreement. It's 51 tasks that we have to come into compliance with, and currently we are out of compliance on 7 tasks. Of those 7 tasks, we're in partial compliance with 3 of them. So, part of taking on this position was understanding the situation that we were in, and I had to put forth a plan with the federal monitor to hopefully brings us into full compliance by the end of the year. That's the hope. So we're working diligently on it. I think we have done some really progressive things, though. I think, Dr. Marshall, you just mentioned our reduction in African-American stops. I started an initiative about 5 years ago called intelligence-led policing. And over that 5 years, we've reduced the stops of African-Americans over 65%. And so really, I believe that the beginning of having any negative interaction with a police officer starts from that initial stop, that touch point, right? When you come into contact with police. And so if you can reduce the number of times in particular that you stop African-American men, I think you reduce the likelihood that there's going to be some force encounter between police and law and African-American men. So that's really been our focus, is how do we make sure that our stops are stopping the right people and not everybody. And so I think we've been leading the way on that.
Because although he recognizes the importance of humanity and the importance of change inside policing, that culture is steeped in control, as opposed to protecting and serving. In many instances, it's kind of been, controlling and really arresting your way out. Now, a majority of the police are absolutely got the best heart, the best training, and want to get it right. But we have to grow out of this culture of over-policing, particularly Black communities.
But when people look at a police accountability and reform, and they see this happened in New Orleans, and this happened in Wisconsin, and this happened in, I'm looking at this one in Virginia where they pepper sprayed an Army officer on a traffic stop, that there's a shooting of the young man who had the cell phone in Chicago. There was the shooting, in Sacramento. Then there was a shooting of the young man who put his hands up in Chicago. What people don't understand is that there is no national policing. There is no national policing. And if you're going to fix police departments, and Chief and I have talked about this number, there's roughly 18,000 departments. And if they're in the sheriff's departments, there's more than that around the United States. Because there is no national policing, each one of these departments has to basically fix themselves. And so when you have to look and see how Oakland's doing, and you have to look and see how San Francisco's doing. You have to look at Daly City, how Daly City's doing, how's doing. And that's all these chiefs and these commissioners have control over. Now, I think they can become examples of what you can do in other cities, but Chief Armstrong doesn't have control of what goes on in Detroit.
People, when I heard that throughout my long career, when they would say, "Man, I don't like cops," I said, if you ever had to call 911 and a police officer were to show up, who would you rather show up, me or somebody else? And every time their answer was always me, because they knew that they could trust me, and they knew that I was going to make the right decision and the fair decision, right? And so I think, in this moment, I think for me, it is an opportunity, right? Who would have ever thought out of this long career that this moment would come right now in the midst of a national call for change in policing? And so I think, for me, timing is everything, and this is the right time. And so if you grow up in Oakland and the home of the Black Panthers, if you grew up in West Oakland, where I grew up, you didn't have a relationship with police at all. And the saddest part is that sometimes the communities that are the least safe in the city, who have the greatest need for safety, have the least amount of trust in police. And so, I thought, how can I impact policing in a different way? How can I be a part of the change that, I wanted to see? I wanted, wonder why, I couldn't feel safe. And so and you really realize that when violence hits your own home. And so I was unfortunate enough to have my brother killed. And in that moment, when you lose a relative, and you understand now the only way to get justice is actually through police, right? Because community is calling for something different. Where I'm from, that's you're expected to retaliate on behalf of your family member. That's how it goes. And in that moment, you want the police department and you want law enforcement to do what it is that they're supposed to do and identify the person and hold that person responsible. But for me, in this moment, as I think about change in policing across the country, I think about as an African-American man, the fears that I've had my entire life from driving a car, and every time I see a police car get behind me, my anxiety level go out the roof. And less known when they turn the lights on, me being afraid about what is this moment going to look like for me. And so for me to be in this leadership position, to be able to make policy, to create training, to be able to address the implicit bias that has been a part of policing for so long, that's what I think this moment means for me, to be able to change a culture that wasn't meant for me. It's so ironic that we celebrated the city of Oakland's 160 something birthday last week. I think it's the 159th or something like that. And I thought in that moment, as I was taking a photo to celebrate the city's historic moment, I thought, wow, when this city was created, they had no idea that I would be their police chief one day. Right? That wasn't meant for me. And so for me, it's not just about today. It's about young African-American boys that see me now and recognize that they can obtain this position as well, that they can be part of their own, safety, community, public safety in their communities, and they can be leaders and they can make change in systems that don't work for Black people. And so that's what my goal is. I know this system doesn't work in the way in which it's been for many years. And now as I sit in this leadership position, how can I address the things that nobody else has wanted to talk about? How can I talk about searching of probation and parolees just because they're African American? How can I talk about when you use force and who you decide to use force on, right? How can I begin to talk about how we look at officers' action on a day-to-day basis to make sure it's consistent with policy, right? So putting these processes in place to hold people accountable is just about doing the job, but doing the job the right way and having tremendous respect for my community and wanting people to police my community in a fair and just way. So when I leave, I hope my legacy is that things have changed so much so that when I walk down the street, I don't have to have that same fear. I'm hoping that my kids don't have to tell my grandsons the story of what you should do when a police officer stops you. That's the challenge. How can we end the cycle of needing to fear law enforcement? And that's the challenge.
When I wrote my book, I wrote a piece about the police, and I said to a lot of the, in fact, actually, this has got me in trouble a couple of times when people read the book and read it through their lens. But what I said was, to many in the Black community, the police seem like an occupying army, right? and there's something else I wrote, and I said, the problem as I see it is that not all police are bad, but the good ones can't seem to do anything about the bad ones. That was my one line I read. And what I am seeing and hoping, not just through your individual personalities, but through the changes that you are making in department, that the good ones are doing something about those that do misconduct, changing the policies, whistleblower protection. Now, a lot of people don't know what that is, right? But making it mandatory for officers, not to sit and watch what happens to George Floyd, not to reportable duty to intervene. See, Chief, I do remember the stuff that we talked about as a commission, right? In fact, they got the duty to intervene, putting these things in place so that those officers, if they don't do it, they can be punished. It's not just good men and good women police officers, it's getting policies in place that prevent these officers, from doing these things and changing. How many times have we heard that it was in policy? Well, if you change the policy, it won't be in policy, right? When you hear reportable use of force, when you hear time and distance, when you hear de-escalation, when you hear all of these things that are written into changing the way officers operate. And that's because you guys have seen and looked at best practice and say, look, we got to change the way this DGO is written so that officers operate differently, so they can be held to different standards. When you see proportionality, so it's not just good men. I know you guys are great men, and I know Commissioner Jackson's great, and Commissioner Book is great, but also changing the way the department operate and the training and who you pick in the first place will lead you to. But it's a huge lift. It's a huge lift. And people don't have a lot of patience and a lot of time only because every time something happens, I always say that a Canadian Mountie would be held by something that happens in Georgia just because he has on a blue uniform. So I know we got some questions in the chat.
The failure of a police department than most people know, because they're at the front lines, making it happen, and all the policies that we're, trying to push through the department, those sergeants have to be the ones that are out there in the field when things are happening to make sure things are getting done. And if you can't get through to those, and we look, I'm not going to tell you we neither one of us, I can speak for myself, have reached and gotten through to everybody in terms of touching their hearts and minds about which way this department is going. There are some people that still don't get it. I know that, but when you get to those supervisors and you get them in a way that they really believe in what we're doing, and they're willing to step up and be accountable and hold their officers accountable, that's when you're going to have real success. So, that we can't be everywhere, and a lot of energy goes into really trying to get to those, not only the police officers doing the work, but get to those sergeants, because, all these critical calls that we talk about where these critical incidents can have bad outcomes, usually you want that sergeant to be there and take a step back and calm everybody down and manage the incident, make sure all the policies are being followed in the way that we want them to be followed. And if that does not happen, we're going to have some problems. And so one of the things, when you talk about accountability, there's nothing that makes me more upset than to have officers get in trouble, even though they have their own personal responsibility to do what's right and follow policies. But when there's a supervisor right there and they don't step up, we have to deal with that situation. So the accountability at that level of the organization is so important to get things done. And I think, it's an important, all the ranks are important. I'm not saying nobody, doesn't count, but what those sergeants do can make or break a police department. So, we got to get to those sergeants.
Couple reasons. We now have good leadership. We are getting ready to bring in an inspector general, which will provide more capacity for reviewing cases that need to be reviewed. We are updating policies and protocols, and we're not just doing it by ourselves, we're doing it with the support and the help of community members through many ad hoc committees. We are the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force, which came up with like 1 million recommendations. So many of them are right on target. So now we have a playbook that City Council can try to legislate through the budget. And the creativity and the innovation that is coming out of Oakland, sometimes inside the department and sometimes outside the department, because, let's face it, Dr. Marshall, as youth developers, we have to take risks all the time. Mm-hmm. We don't always know if something's going to work, but we got to try. I believe the same is true in the police department. Not that people can go rogue, but good ideas don't have to be regurgitated. They can be created. They can be, partnered with other entities like the community. A lot of work to do, but I believe the key thing is leadership, and Chief Armstrong's going to take us there.
I want to say about you, DJ, and you got I don't know, was it a D? I don't know if it was a DGO, but you passed a resolution at the commission that got Black Lives Matter. Tell everybody about that, because I was like, this brother ain't playing. Go ahead, say that.
Yeah, well, it was in the heart of what was going on around the country. And myself, and at the time, Commissioner Damali Taylor, we were spending a lot of time with some of the coalitions from the African-American community here in San Francisco. And one of the things that really stood out to me, a gentleman by the name of Majid Crawford, we were in this discussion and he said it would just be absolutely phenomenal to even get a small gesture from our own police department to have, they just wanted a sticker that said that Black Lives Matter in each of the police departments. And we took that as a commission and really just ran with it. First of all, it came from the voice of the community. Commissioner Taylor and I drafted the resolution. And I mean, Chief backed it up from day one. And we took it from just being a sticker to now this elaborate movie-sized life poster that's probably about as tall as I am. You can't see me with me sitting down, and Dr. Marshall's a little bit taller than me, but I'm about 6'1", Chief Armstrong. And this poster just lays out this whole resolution about what it, not just what Black Lives Matters means, but what it means to each station here in San Francisco. And we were able to get those posted in every station in San Francisco. And it wasn't meant to be a political stunt or political heist to back up the Black Lives Matter movement. It was simply one of the things that we fight for on a daily basis, to say that our lives matter, and they matter to the San Francisco Police Department. And I think we were able to do that beautifully. I think in the beginning, some folks were talking about the size and the colors, not understanding that they're Pan-African colors, which is a whole nother historical conversation we need to have sometimes within our communities. But, it was just it was a small gesture, yet a very huge gesture. I think one, huge in terms of having the chief and the department and the command staff back that up, and having it and actually doing what we said in a timely manner. That's one of the other things, as we know, when you pass a resolution or we pass a department general order, sometimes things can take time. But we said what we were going to do, did it better than what we felt like we could do. And so now when you go into the stations here in San Francisco, that poster is front and center on our walls at all of our stations.
A battle over some posters that would have to include the words Black Lives Matter and will be displayed at each police station in San Francisco. That battle is heating up. Kenny Choi is live in San Francisco with those details. Kenny?
Ken, the posters would have to be this size, 32 inches by 24, and include the phrase Black Lives Matter. Each police station in San Francisco, including the one right behind me, would have to display these signs in an area where people coming in would be able to see it. That's not sitting well with the rank and files union.
Large murals featuring the words Black Lives Matter painted on city streets.
It's not happening in my town.
Chalked in front of houses.
We're not doing anything illegal.
Neither am I.
Actually, you are actually.
Have electrified confrontations. Now the fight has come to the police department.
I can speak for the command staff and members of this department. Black lives do matter, and they matter to this police department.
But in a letter sent to the police commission, which voted Wednesday unanimously in favor of the mandated signs, the police union, which represents more than 2,000 officers, said in part, the directive that the San Francisco Police Department prominently display posters in support of that same political organization establishes a new precedent that raises concerns about introducing political agendas.
What we're talking about here is not, the Black Lives Matter organization or an entity.
Damali Taylor is one of 5 commissioners appointed by the mayor and the board of supervisors.
We are talking about an expression of values, that Black Lives Matter to the San Francisco Police Department.
Tony Montoya, head of the SFPOA, said he was unavailable for an on-camera interview, but sent us this statement today, reading in part, the police commission should put away their soapboxes and stop their political grandstanding. It's time for the commissioners to get beyond hashtags, posters, and politics.
This is not at the expense or in lieu of anybody else's life. That's not what this is about.
The posters will have to be displayed within 30 days.
Yes, we will support. Yes, we are fully committed to implementing this resolution.
The police union's stance on the posters is clear, but they added saying, quote, make no mistake, the SFPOA supports the notion that all black and brown lives matter, end quote. Live in San Francisco, Kenny Choi, KPIX5.
Look, I always said, people ask me, what's the hardest thing you've ever done? Working with young people? I said, oh, hell no. Hey, nothing. Give me every gangbanger, drug dealer in the world, put him in front of me. We can go at it, right? Dealing with the police department, because it was so entrenched. So dealing with the biases they bring and the recruitment and the training and getting officers. I heard a high-ranking officer say one time that if an officer told on another officer when he saw something that wasn't right, that he was snitching. I'm like, snitching? What do you mean snitching? I mean, I was incensed, and I'm not gonna say who it was because I know who he was. You know I was. What do you mean he's snitching? No, he's trying to tell him to do the right thing.
The police are able to use the press to make the white public think that 90% or 99% of the Negroes in the Negro community are criminals. And once the white public is convinced that most of the Negro community is a criminal element, then this automatically paves the way for the police to move into the Negro community, exercising Gestapo tactics, stopping any black man who is on the sidewalk, whether he is guilty or whether he is innocent, whether he is well dressed or whether he is poorly dressed, whether he is educated or whether he is dumb, whether he's a Christian or whether he's a Muslim. As long as he is black and a member of the Negro community, the white public thinks that the white policeman is justified in going in there and trampling on that man's civil rights and on that man's human rights. Once the police have convinced the white public that the so-called Negro community is a criminal element, they can go in and question, brutalize, murder unarmed, innocent Negroes, and the white public is gullible enough to back them up.